In present-day Japan, a fancy casket is retrieved from the ocean. And to show the importance of this historic relic, the cam pans to corpses of men that tried to get their hands on it. Looking at real-world history, this might be the work of the British Museum. Funny enough, after the man who took the coffin left, the moon shined on the coffin, and a being that embodies every teenage girl's fantasy, awakened from its long slumber, dripped from head to toe in old British-esque fashion. Sometime later, in a school, a redhead fella finds himself out of luck after the gates of his school close. Fortunately for him, though, the MC who woke up yesterday from hundreds of years of slumber decided that the first place he should visit is a school. So he transforms his drip to match the boy's school uniform. After noticing him, the redhead is comforted that he isn't the only loser who is late to school. Although the kid can't recall ever seeing a dude in the school with such high levels of unspoken riz, the principal certainly does. In the principal's office, he senses something is off and rushes to the door where he greets the main man as his master. Frankenstein gets catus etrama di Riesel, a cup of tea, and then fills him in on how long he was asleep, i.e. 820 years. Hearing this, any man would be taken aback a little bit, but not our boy. He is as cool as a cucumber. Instead, he asks Frank if this is where he lives, to which the latter answers, "Nah, fam. I have my own crib. This is just where we teach young blood." Intrigued, Rye questions what this school thing is about. Frankenstein explains that a school is an establishment made to enlighten the youth. Hearing this, catus etrama di Riesel decides it might be worthwhile to try out this school thing, considering he now has over 800 years of history to catch up on. So, after some brief document forging, the 820-plus-year-old geezer enrolls as a new student at the academy. The teacher introduces him to the class as Rye, which will be a far better way to refer him to moving on instead of catus etrama di Riesel, no matter how cool it might sound. Anyways, the redhead Shinwoo recalls the new kid from that morning, prompting the teacher to offload the responsibility for the new students onto him. Even though Shinwoo doesn't want to be responsible for him, this event incurs the wrath of the Teenage Girl Council as they are all jealous that he gets to care for Rye. And you know they are so down bad when you see them probably imagining how many children they could have with this man. Coincidentally, making Shinwoo realize that he is, indeed, bitchless. Meanwhile, the British Museum had come to find out that the historic coffin they confiscated was gone. Naturally, they didn't take too kindly to the failure as it reflected on the questioning methods. Looking at the corpses around, and being fed with the noise, the little guy gives the okay for the big boy holding the failure against the wall to feed, so he bares his fangs and chomps down on the guy's neck, getting a look into his memories only to see that the guy had nothing to do with the disappearance of the casket. With the huge mess on their hands, the henchmen have to find it soon, or they'll be in big trouble. So, they have the poor bastard they sucked earlier, no pun intended, turn into a ghoul and lead the way to find the girl that they saw in his memory. In the school cafeteria, Shinwoo offers Rye some ramen, and then Shinwoo breaks his chopsticks to eat, causing Rye to have flashbacks of Vietnam. We are speaking of stereotypical vamps getting staked. But when Shinwoo's friend offers him some kimchi, it also sends him into a flashback because of the garlic inside it. Rye smirks, thinking these fools are trying an attempt on his life with these basic folklore superstitious methods. Later, while the gang walks home together, they talk about meeting up again at some point, but then they hear a girl scream. Therefore, Shinwoo zooms to her location without a second thought. The girl being attacked by the ghoul is named Yuna, and luckily for her, Shin just comes in time to drop-kick the shit out of that ugly bastard, who incidentally landed on a pole that went through his neck. Naturally, the only smart thing to do in such a situation is to take the f*** off at top speed, and so they dragged an unfazed Rye with them. Before he left, though, the main man noticed something. Behind a corner, the people that are after his casket were hiding. The men could sense that Rye was not an ordinary person. Speaking about ordinary people, after the students made a good distance away, Yuna thanked Shinwoo for his help, which he clearly appreciated and was giddy about. Well, until the focus shifted to the new kid. For no absolute reason, she thanked Rye as well for saving her. The group agrees that it's getting late, and they should head home, so they ask Rye where he lives and escort him there. Considering the man has just woken up from an 820-year-old nap and is far from home, it's safe to assume he does not have any assets to his name, or in other words, he's currently homeless. Luckily, he has the most important thing he would need on hand: Frankenstein's printed tender PFP with the latter's number on it in case his master gets lost. Meanwhile, the coffin retrieval squad is at a loss for what they should do now, since they haven't managed to accomplish their mission yet. To make matters worse, their handlers, Jake and Marie, have arrived to check in on them. M21 and M24 don't have the coffin yet, but they have a lead on how to find it, so they are granted some more time to get it done. Although they leave them be for now, the new bad guys make it clear that there won't be a next time if they disappoint again. M21 recalls what happened to the last guy who failed a mission for the organization, and that was the day he realized he would rather work at McDonald's than do this. That's why he was assigned to this mission, to find a coffin holding the Noblesse, an absolute being power that he wants to use to get himself and his friend out of the organization and gain their freedom. Meanwhile, Jake just killed a bunch of people at the hospital, solely because he can. The next day, news of the hospital massacre has spread, and the students wonder if it could be related to the guy that attacked Yuna. Later that day, they head home and say their goodbyes to Rai, while being watched by 21 and 24. Rai notices them on the roof, but doesn't take any action, yet. That said, 21 wants to jump on business and get a head start on their handlers, but then Jake and Marie appear behind them and take over the operation. As the kids walk home, Yuna gets a bad feeling and asks the other two if they can go down the other way, because she's getting, let's say, murdery vibes from that alley. Sure enough, her hunch was on the money, as Jake reared his ugly head to collect them, and I can't but emphasize on ugly. So, to cleanse our eyes, we move back home with Rai telling Frank about his day and how he got his ass handed to him in Valorant. All in all, it was a fun day. Frank then got an odd message from Shinwoo, who is currently getting beaten up in an abandoned warehouse. Although they were supposed to be using the students as bait, Jake gave the order to eat, and the ghoul pounced to feast. However, Captain Japan gets his second wind and knocks the ghoul out before running away with the others. Meanwhile, Frank and Rai realize that Shinwoo might be in danger, so they rush to the scene. Back at the warehouse, Jake kills the ghoul for failing to eat a couple of high school kids and begins chasing after them by himself. The kids were about to get away, but they were hit with the worst stroke of luck that has killed so many in horror movies. The elevator door is too f***ing slow. Therefore, Jake manages to catch them. Shinwoo tries to put on a fight, but he gets the crap kicked out of him. Yet, even with his bones cracked, Shin refuses to stay down when Jake is about to go after Yuna and the other lad who hasn't gotten a name yet. One thing that must be noted is that Shinwoo, without a doubt, is one of the realest secondary characters in anime. Even 24 can tell, as the latter gets flashbacks to one of his friends who was killed by Jake, in the same manner, doing the same thing to save his friends. So this display of courage from the young one has pushed M24 to stand up to his bully. To make clear that he doesn't want anything to do with the organization anymore, M24 delivers a knuckle sandwich straight to Jay's face. Likewise, 21 is no longer considered an agent of the org, so Jake and Marie move in to kill them. On the roof, Marie attacks 21 and has him bloody and beaten. But, as she is about to give him his severance check by severing his head, she is stopped by Frankenstein and Rai, who ask where they have kept the students. 21 thinks they will at least be able to save 24 from Jake if they go down there together, so he tells them where the kids are and says he'll hold Marie back long enough. Taking one look at this man's sorry state, Rai immediately decides that his dumbass can't hold back shit, so the holding back mission is left for Frankenstein. Rai and 21 get to the basement as Jake is about to kill the students. 21 goes straight after the big bad, but he gets his ass combed and is sent home packing. Meanwhile, Frank is having a little trouble with Marie, so Rai permits him to break his seal. Let's just say, the maiden got thoroughly penetrated. Back to Rai, Jake is still mocking him without knowing he is this close to getting clapped by the silent Riz King. Not looking him straight in the eye, Jake deduces the pretty boy is scared. However, Rai responds by forcing him to kneel in a position where their eyes now meet. And it only went downhill from there for Jake. After he got treated like a bitch, he transforms to reassert his dominance. But despite everything he has thrown at Rai, he has not moved from that one spot this entire time. He does Jake one final courtesy and puts the students to sleep so they won't witness the violation that is about to go down. Rai finally decides to end things by using a finishing endgame level move on a random tutorial mob, leaving nothing but an arm behind while 21 watches in pure amazement and shock. Elsewhere, a special forces team known as the DA-5 is seen destroying a whole military on their own in an unknown location. The squad consists of a berserker-type figure, a big fat ugly bastard because every group has to have one, a hacker, a pretty boy sniper that is not afraid to free fall from a helicopter, and their team leader who looks like a lone wolf type of guy. 100% remember that. After putting down this small army, the team prepares to set out to Japan for their next mission: investigate the disappearance of 2 Union members. Meanwhile, back in Japan, we see the 2 younglings from before walking to school. The main cast talks with M21 after he became basically a homeless man and convinces him that the best course of action is to stay with them. Also, they give him a job to do in the meantime, while he tries to find out his name, as well as his late friend's name. That said, one of the reasons M21 agreed to work at the school as a security guard is to pay off his debts of living in Frankenstein's house. To put it short, the bros got each other. Moving to Frankenstein's office, he affirms to Rai that he has erased the memories of his friends after the recent incident against members of the Union. Rai thanks him and then asks his boy to hand him the item, a Sharpie for him to put his mark on Shinwoo's cast before the lesson starts. After the school day ends, the trio meets at the roof to have a breather. Much to Frank's surprise, Rai opens up and declares how much he likes this new world and the lifestyle they are living. Sadly, these moments of bliss are tested the next day when a violent gang barges onto school grounds looking for Yusuke Toshiro, who happens to be none other than Shinwoo. For some reason, the show decided to change his name, so don't be confused if we call the redhead guy Toshiro from now on. That being said, let's continue. The gang is there for an unrelated incident in which Toshiro helped the gang leader's girlfriend from tripping, which made the gang leader insecure and angry. M21 decides to let go of his fear of being detected and effortlessly takes down the gang's leader, causing them to leave in a panic. Later that night, DA5 arrives in Japan to begin their investigation. Meanwhile, 2 other unknown people gaze from a rooftop. Like DA5, the edgy pair is also there to look into the incident and find out the whereabouts of the coffin. After concluding that the building was destroyed by supernatural powers, the 2 decide to head to the least supernatural place, a high school. From the get-go, the short stack shows no respect for M21, as he demands to be shown the way to the person in charge of this academic institution. Inside the principal's office, Frank suspects that these kids might be from the homeland, but he decides to keep his suspicions to himself and then asks M21 to take his leave. As soon as 21 exits the room, Regis attempts to mind control Frankenstein, who recognizes this power as being similar to Rai's but at a much weaker level, so it doesn't work on him. Regis, however, still clueless, dictates that they will be transfer students at the school, and Frankenstein plays along in an attempt to investigate them for Rai. Speaking of which, once Regis lays eyes on Rai, he knows something is off with him, but still can't put his finger on it as they are working under the misconception that every person in this class is normal. Since Toshiro is assigned to help them around the school, the gang eats together, during which the brothers get taken aback by how elegant Rai is. Likewise, the 4-eyed background character gets charmed by the siblings, and his homie notices that, so he puts it on himself to be the best wingman moving on, and so he asks Rai if they can hang out at his place later tonight. On their way home, M21 consults with Frankenstein and concludes that these people must be Noblesse like Rai. However, Frank does keep it vague, saying although they are from the same country and society, they are not the same. Back to home, Frankenstein discovers that Toshiro has brought Regis and Sierra to his home because they informed him they have nowhere to live. Although low-key mad from all the mess and commotion they are doing, Rai gives the okay to Frankenstein to accept them into his house, and the latter welcomes them with semi-open arms. With that matter being solved, the gang continues to have a good time. Toshiro tries to push his boy into Sierra, but the former doesn't seem to be taking the hints or wanting to, so let's move from this sad scene. The next day, after Sierra saw a tattoo on 21's hand, the same one that human experiments get to be identified, Regis confronts M21 after school regarding the whereabouts of the missing coffin, abandoning one's humanity, and hidden agendas. As a result, the 2 decide to talk and they fist at the back of the school building. Long story short, 21 gets his ass handed to him. But to his luck, Sierra informs Regis of an incident with Toshiro and the bullies, so the fight is put on hold to go and try to help the gang. When the boys arrive, they find out that Toshiro has already taken care of them, and everyone walks back home for the night. Again, a big win for the Toshiro man, which low-key catches Sarah's eye. The next day in the household of Frankenstein, the boys are having a bit of a sibling rivalry over soup. But if you thought that was ridiculous, the new boy attempts not only to mind control old Frank, but also Rai to make him forget this silly moment. However, unlike Frank, Rai isn't as good of an actor, so he leaves Regis confused on whether it worked or not. Back at school, we get the breaking info that Ikon, the four-eyed boy, is not interested in the new transfer girl, but more interested in the height of the transfer boy, something the pair was discussing before Regis ran to mouth off his new Oni son. Later at night, we see Ikon facing off with DA Union hacker, Tao. Even though the virtual battle is close, the war comes to an end when the clumsy redhead trips over the power wire. Frustrated, Ikon steps off to make a phone call to his uncle to let him know that the police station he works at was being hacked, leaving his friend behind. During the time he was away, Tao sent some messages, which Toshiro replied to in a not-so-subtle way. The interaction evidently gave him the impression that his innocent friend swings the same way. Yet, it didn't matter to Toshiro, who vowed to support his friend no matter what, adding he would beat whoever picks on him. On the other end, the DA squad has found out that M21, aka the security guard, is still alive, so they send two guys to get him. Once they located the big man after a long normal day of working at school, the two tried to talk him into an after-work drink. However, the talks break once 21 becomes a bit aggressive when the DA men insult M21's dead friends. Also, to make matters worse, the vamp kid arrived at the scene. Instead of physically helping our boy, he went on a roasting rampage insulting the guy Drip. So of course the budget-cut Joker didn't take it too nicely and went for an attack, which M21 blocked with his body. Then, DA Captain arrived and took the Silver Fox before things needlessly escalated. Speaking about escalating, Tao upped his game and hacked Ikon's network while they were having a fun, friendly quote-unquote match. However, the one not having a fun, friendly time is Regis, who is in a foul mood after M21 left with his, what he thinks, human-modified friends. Little does he know that the DA squad is roughing M21 up for answers about the coffin. From the questions being asked, M21 notices that the squad doesn't know about his departure from the Union. The cool-headed gunman offers the lad some water, which in my objective 100% correct opinion puts him on the normal side of the group. After sipping some refreshing H2O, M21 agrees to cooperate on the terms of him getting some info from the Union about his friends' names. Also, some food because all the beating got him hungry. Back in school, the kids notice the disappearance of their security guard. Consequently, they notice their boy Regis has been acting a bit weird lately. Although the short king claims he's fine, we all know why he's not acting himself. He misses his step Oni-chan. Later that day, the kids invite themselves to Principal Frank's house to blow some steam. However, Ikon receives a message from Tao to meet IRL. Thus, he leaves his bro to do all the mundane chores. But on the upside, the Toshiro man had great company. If I say so myself, top-tier waifu for sure. While chit-chatting, the young birds come across a couple of lackeys trying to pick on the wrong guy. Now be prepared for a couple of fast perspective switches. On the other end, Ikon is having a peaceful coffee time with Tao, who expresses his interest in the four-eyed deviant. Back in the alleyway, the redhead is getting thanked by the gunman for helping him. They later befriend each other. Likewise, the four-eyed boy befriended his old rival and started calling him boss, believing he was the coolest person he ever met, which the latter appreciates very much. Fast forward and the two DA men Takeo and Tao meet on the roof. Tao believes that his buddy is not like the rest of the douche squad, pointing out how he leaves people alive when they are on a mission and his compassion with M21 the other day. When asked about the reason for being in this god-awful line of work, Takeo reveals that he has a sister the Union is keeping as a hostage. Hearing this, Tao offers to look for Takeo's sister by hacking the Union, to which the latter thanks. Back to the M21 situation, he's still being questioned by the lunatic named Shark. Takeo tells him, "Calm your tits, boy." Shark responds with, "Remember all the women and kids we were supposed to kill but you let live? Yeah, I killed them all." And to add insult to injury, he brings up the guy's sister, alluding to her death. Enraged, Takeo pulls a gun on him and says, "Keep my sister's name out of your f***ing mouth." The standoff gets cut, and Shark heads out to grab the kid that M21 was trying to protect. Regis notices him from afar and goes to fight him. Surprisingly, the boy could hold his own. For some reason, I had my doubts. But nope. Regis stood on business that evening. Therefore, the lunatic powered up to stand a chance, yet the boy was still far stronger. However, when it's revealed that his fat partner has captured the other kids, Regi Boy stands down and they take them to base. When Regis wakes up, he finds himself in a tricky situation. On the other side, Sarah tells Frankenstein and Rye that her connection with Regis has been severed, meaning he's either unconscious or dead. Before leaving the only two dudes who are powerful enough to help, she thanks them for everything and tells them not to wait. Frank then tells his master, the other kids are not responding, adding that they also were with Regis. Soon after, the kids wake up and it leaves M21, Takeo, and Tao in a very awkward situation. The scene cuts to busty Sarah, who is being followed by the present OP characters in the series. Back in the safe house, the good DA boys try saving the kids by talking them out of their current situation, but the captain this time orders Shark to kill them as they ain't letting any loose ends. Soon after, Sarah arrives upstairs and engages in a fight with the fatty of the group who is no match for her. Downstairs, the captain tells Takeo to go up and check on him, mainly because he doesn't want Takeo to witness or crash the massacre that is about to happen there. While for M21, he was fighting his own demons. Save the kids, or don't save the kids. Attack Shark, or don't attack. Thankfully, through a little nudge from an extra dead M24, the living get priority this time, and he stops Shark from killing the badass redhead. Outside, the man with the glorious long hair fights the man with the glorious blonde hair, who seems to be surprised by how strong his rival is this time around. Meanwhile, the busty queen is still fighting with the fat man, while down under, M21 is fighting the man who likes to play with knives, which gives Regis a morale boost, enabling him to break his handcuffs and join the fight, as he is far stronger than the lunatic, putting him on the robs, so the captain had to step in and power up by the blood of his underlings. Turns out, the drugs that the squad takes to enhance their powers were originally made for the members to reach their power ceiling, so the captain would then kill them and absorb their powers. And now with all the juice he needs from Shark alone, the Cap throws Regis around like a rag doll to then shift his focus on the kids. Luckily though, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, finally arrives. Outside, the fight between Takeo and Frank hits another level when Frankenstein's sadistic side comes out to play after he powers up. However, Takeo is not going to die yet. Not until he sees his sister one more time. Meanwhile, Sarah has pulled out a death scythe and reaped that fat ass. While back inside, everyone sees how powerful Rye is by outclassing Captain Douche via mere words. Cornered like a pathetic mouse, the Cap lashes out and orders Tao to use the drug to absorb it from him. For some reason, Tao doesn't put up a fight. That twink almost agrees immediately, but thanks to Ikun's Lil Bro energy, the boss decides he wants to live. Back outside where Takeo is being put to the test, Sarah sees the overwhelming power from afar and rushes to the site. Takeo gets hit on final attack but doesn't die, and Big Papa Frank decides not to finish him after the pretty boy shows remorse over his actions. Then we back inside, with a twink who has disobeyed the orders of his captain after the big bad wolf said he would kill the kids. The captain goes to kill him, but Rye saves the man and tells Ikon, "We are friends. There is no need to plead for me," before crushing the douche with his blood in front of the eyes of the other nobles who are dumbfounded by Rye's sheer power. With the matter settled and the gang chilling, we see Frankenstein worried about his master Rizel, who has pushed himself too far to the point he is coughing blood, a seemingly recurrent theme whenever he unleashes so much power that ultimately puts his body at risk. Likewise, Rye is also worried that Frankenstein might be getting to his old habits since he has broken his power seal without permission, but then he acknowledges that Frank wouldn't have done it without a good reason. Soon after, the scene shifts to the dinner table, where Tao is having the time of his life before being joined by M21 and Takeo. After dinner, M21 contemplates whether he's able to protect people or not. Rye hears that from behind, then takes a drop of his blood and shows him a glance at his inner potential. "You are not weak at all, and you can save many people with your power," Rye said to him before taking his leave. Feeling somewhat satisfied, M21 heads back to his room, passing by the guest's room, where he overheard Tao telling Takeo that his sister doesn't exist, and that the Union manipulated his memory to make him work for them. After some coping, Tao tells him they should leave tomorrow so they won't be a burden to the group. Therefore, the next day the boys are ready to leave, but first Tao tells M21 that he has looked for info about him and his friend, but didn't find a thing as the data was deleted, to then thank the trio for everything they did. M21 stops the duo and asks good old Uncle Frank to let them stay, to which Frank replies, "No problem, as long as the master doesn't mind it," which he doesn't. And as such, The next day when the boys head to school, they find out that Tao and Takeo are now working alongside M21, which depresses our redhead boy who sees all the girls flocking around them. But when Ikon asks him what kind of girl he even likes, Toshiro Man makes it clear that he's into Seira. Following this, the boys head to ask the men for love advice, yet they too are clueless and try to escape from the awkward situation. But when Rai also wishes to help his boy out, the old-timers have no other choice but to play along. And by God, it was cringy as fuck and even brought Loverman number 3 to his knees. Seeing it is indeed hopeless, they head to old Frank for advice, and a piece of advice they don't get, as Uncle Frank was only flexing his love adventures. With no other option, the gang decides to head to the source and ask Regis about Sarah's preferences. Of course, the shorty doesn't seem interested in helping, but when Rai says, "Tell him," the former kneels and they go to the library to study the matters of the heart, which proves to be hard. Thus, they resort to the old-fashioned show of manhood, i.e., playing a basketball game to impress the hoes. Yet, with Rai on their team, it's hard to win, especially when the two silver heads get way into the match, not giving our boy a chance to shine. The silver lining here, though, is that after the game, Sarah hands Loverboy the letter he was trying to write earlier, as someone has put it on her desk. Toshiro asks if he's in trouble, to which she answers, "Seeking love is natural, and being oneself is the most charming." Although she didn't give a yes or no answer, the baddie didn't seem to mind the idea of seeing him through a romantic lens, I guess. And then for the last time, they walked back home together. Yup, you heard that right. Although she seems to like our boy and the gang is down with the human vibes, reality of the matter is that there's no place for Ikon and Toshiro in this show anymore. After discussing within themselves, the group decided that the best option moving forward for their safety is to erase the kids' memories, much to their dismay. Truly, it was a hard choice, which took the hardest of wills. And to complete the pun, the two secondary characters that previously used for plot points got Thanos'd to irrelevant background character status. Following these events, the nobles decide to give good old Tokyo, Japan a visit, to look into matters on why the young nobles haven't returned yet, as well as the whereabouts of the coffin. So the Lord sends Gejutel, the leader of the clan Regis belongs to. Surprisingly, Frankenstein seems to have a history with the dude, but they don't jump on each other's throats. Instead, Frank takes the new visitor back to his place where they can have a cup of tea and talk peacefully, for it seems Gejutel is on good terms with Rizal and highly respects him, unlike their new lord. Intrigued about the state of the homeland, the old man informs him of the situation in the land of nobles, that the previous lord entered eternal sleep after Rai disappeared. Eternal sleep is equivalent to death with nobles, so the lord's daughter took over as the new lord, and since then, she has been looking for Rai, considering him as a traitor that led the previous lord to eternal sleep. Following this explanation, Gejutel urges Rizal to go back with him and clear his name. However, the former declines the offer since he prefers his new life as Rai much more. Later that night, while Frank is showing the new guest his room, we get the backstory of Frankenstein. Turns out good old silly Frank was known as the noble hunter in old times, as he used to catch and slaughter them nobles for dinner. The dude was unhinged. Also, we learn that even way back then Rai was antisocial, refusing to stay with his own kind and choosing to be alone. By far, that was the funniest moment in the series, and to contrast it, the scene cuts to Gejutel and Rajak facing Frankenstein to get him to go back with them and meet the Lord for a peaceful talk, but Frankenstein, being on his demon arc back then, doesn't cooperate and decides to stand on business. The standoff started out decent, with neither of the fighters having a clear upper hand. Well, that was until Frank pulled a soul weapon just as powerful as the one the clan leaders use. Although it was a close and intense fight, Frankenstein eventually lost control over his power, causing an explosion that put the fight to a halt. Incidentally, Frankenstein ended up stumbling into the mansion of no other than Rizal. Frank claimed he was a new servant, and that the lord of the mansion forgot to mention that he hired him. Funny enough, he doesn't know that he is talking to the lord of the mansion. The misunderstanding is soon cleared, though, when the two clan leaders arrive at the crypt and ask to bring Frankenstein back with them. Seeing Frank was injured, Rizal refused to hand him off, and so he sent the leaders back to their lord empty-handed. 5 years later, we see Gejutel fighting with Frank in a practice match for Frankenstein to control his powers. Yet even after all that time seeing him hanging with Rizal and chilling with clan leaders, the other nobles still hate Frank's presence and start to dislike Rai for his actions towards him, but Frank doesn't seem to let the haters get to his head. Later, during a meeting with the Lord, Frankenstein learns that Rye puts humans first over his fellow nobles, maintaining the balance between the two kinds, which has made him the point of disdain to some nobles, even though he basically has the status of a god among them. Then, the Lord asks Frankenstein whether he formed a pact with Rysel or not, saying it will longer his lifespan and allow him to stay by Rysel's side. The former doesn't seem too keen on the idea, as he doesn't believe the power dichotomy between nobles and humans is fair, something he always viewed poorly from what he saw in different nobles' houses. However, the Lord assures him that such cases where a human is forced into a pact of servitude are frowned upon, and also are rare, as the pacts are mainly done when a noble and a human are on the same page and wish to stay together. After that, Frank leaves while the rest of the nobles enter the Lord's room, and let me tell you, they were not happy from what they heard. Well, one seemed very pissed at the idea of Rye forming a pact with a filthy human. Outside, old man Gajutal sees Frank and tells him, "Don't do anything stupid," considering Rye is risking his life. Frank is surprised by that, yet he later gets baited into fighting the guy who was pissed from earlier and was jealous of Frank's relationship with Rye. And although Frank didn't mind being talked down to, he got angry when the guy said Rye is better off being alone, which ultimately sent him to Madness City. Rye and the other lord arrive in kick-ass fashion, saving the men. Rye then brings Frank back to his senses by using immense power that makes him cough blood. After realizing he has put his body on the line, Frankenstein goes through the blood pact with Rye, and they become, as the show puts it, one. Back in modern times, Gejutel agrees to keep Catus et Trauma de Rysel's revival a secret and leaves the kid behind to experience what a normal human life has to offer, believing it would be a great way to make them good future clan lords. Once the old geezer is back, the Lord questions him about his findings. Gejutel tries to hide the truth from the young lord, but it doesn't matter when she can order someone to bring Sarah back to read her mind. That someone happens to be the brother of a new clan leader, whose father was the guy training Frank how to control his powers. Unlike his big brother and late father, this little brat is annoying as hell and is currently in Japan. Although he's a nearly 500-year-old vamp, the new kid has no manners whatsoever. From the first time his foot touched the school premises, he tried pulling some mind tricks, as well as attacking the trio security guard, not to mention putting his hands on little Regis before leaving Sarah with some nasty words. Soon after this incident, the group learns that the boy had previously proposed to Sarah, and when she refused, he destroyed everything in sight before his older brother restrained and put him in confinement, grounded his ass for 10 years. Later, after a comforting chit-chat with Regis, Sarah leaves to go and face the little brat. Rye senses it, but Frankenstein stops him saying, "If you go, they will be aware of your presence and they might come for you." So Rye lifts the power seal on Frankenstein so he can go and save Sarah instead. That said, the only person needing saving is the little brat who got so angry after the baddie told him to f*** off. Luckily, Frankenstein had gone to show the boy why they used to call him the Noble Hunter. And let me tell you, the moment he let loose, the little brat didn't have a chance. That said, Frank, being an unk now, had the maturity needed to hold back and try not to get too frisky, or the city would get destroyed. Thus, to prevent any further destruction, Regis and Sarah joined the fight, stopping the little brat. With no other option, the short stack pulled the Lord's command to retrieve Sarah. As such, she went with him without putting up a fight. Following this twist, the trio, Regis, Frankenstein, and Rye, decided to head back to the land of nobles. There, Sarah gets questioned by the Lord, but she doesn't speak, so the Lord puts her under mind pressure. Seeing her in agony, the leaders beg the Lord to be easy on her, so she puts her in a cell for the time being. Meanwhile, aboard a private jet, the trio reached the land of nobles, and although the setup was classy, the descent was not. The trio jumped from the plane to make it seem as if a random plane had entered the land by mistake, and crashed, which low-key helped when the word reached the leader. Soon after the crash, the trio made their way to what Regis calls the Forbidden Area, which turns out to be Rysel's house. When they entered, Rye and Frank sensed something weird in the air. After looking around, they found out that the old lord had left his soul weapon, Ragnarok, in Rye's house. Outside, Reggie Boy went to dispatch soldiers who were tracking their footsteps. Reggie was doing all right until they outnumbered him and got his mask blown away. Luckily, the rest of the gang arrived and helped a brother out. Now calling themselves RK4, aka the Rye Knights, the boys revealed that they were on the plane when it crashed. Once the gang regrouped, Frankenstein and Rye explained the situation, as well as somewhat explained Rye's nature, being the Noblesse, not a noble, which is originally not a title for a group, but a title for one person who stands above all meaning. He even trumps the lord position if he deemed it fit. Along those lines, we see a flashback of Rai chit-chatting with the previous lord, who was glad that Rai was starting to express his emotions more and let people in. Incidentally, he asks if Rai wants to be the new lord, but before he answers, the flashback cuts to the modern time. The new lord, after being informed of what has taken place on her land, orders Gejutel to be put to eternal sleep, but when the rest of the leaders object, she was like, "Fine," and then leaves. During a flashback of her own, we find out that the reason for her deep hatred for Rai was because she overheard her father asking Rizel if he wants to be lord, thinking he prefers him more than her. That jealousy led her to Gejutel's cell, where she asked him once and for all, "Who did you meet in Japan?" The old man confesses but says, "Do not be mistaken. It's not because I fear for my life that I told you the truth. Now do your duty and punish this criminal." So the lord orders Gejutel to be put to sleep once again. Meanwhile, M21 and Regis are trying to create an opening for the two main men to get into the lord's castle without trouble. The duo gets cut by the little blonde brat, so M21 tells him to go while he and the other two fight the blondie. Although hesitant, Regis leaves the matter for the boys to handle, and they do a good job managing to outsmart him at first. Sadly though, he proves to be too strong to fall easily. Meanwhile, inside the castle, Sarah has made it out of her cell and is laser-focused on going to save Gejutel, but then gets stopped by a BH, who claims to be Sarah's big sister figure. Likewise, Regis finds himself facing his big brother figure, yet unlike the redhead chick who demands Sarah to go back to her cell, the man tells Regis to flee until things get cleared. But Regis refuses, as he wants to walk the proper path of noble, the one his grandpa Gejutel hoped he would take. Back to the main fight. The trio gets defeated by the little brat, and before he kills them, his big brother arrives and stops him. Following this, Big Uncle Frankenstein arrives, and he lets the little brat know he is not playing any games this time, revealing he has fought the previous head of their clan countless times. Sensing no insincerity in his words, the current head shows respect and summons his soul weapon from the get-go, and in turn, Frankenstein summons the dark spear. Man, oh man, that was a hype moment. The fight was glorious, the two seemed to be tied, but you could feel that Frank had the slight upper hand. Until the trio, who were cheering him on, annoyed the little brat, making him attack them, so Frank protected them and risked taking a shot from his foe. However, his foe turned out to be a real one, as he injured himself and then scolded his brother for his actions. Seeing this, Frankenstein compliments him, saying, "Now I see why the head of your clan chose you to succeed him." On the other end, Regis loses his match, but he does so honorably. Meanwhile, inside the castle, the lord is trying to be intimidating, saying, "I will put you to sleep, Sarah, as well as Gejutel, and Rai will get it too." But Gejutel sees beyond all that BS and tells her, "You can put me down, and for Sarah, I know you don't want to, as she didn't really commit any crime." However, for Catus Etrama de Rizel, we all know that's not happening, especially with Frankenstein by his side, the only human who is powerful enough to be on par with a clan leader and be acknowledged by the previous lord. As if this glazing wasn't enough, the scene shifted back to the fight, showing Frank in all his glory having the upper hand. The little brat calls for his big brother and tells him to take his soul weapon and combine it with his, but the man in the ninja uniform declines, as their weapons were handed down by their father, the previous clan leader, and they must remain as they received them, for each has its own purpose to fulfill. Once again, Frankenstein compliments him, saying his father would be proud, also revealing to them that their father was the one mostly credited to train and teach Frankenstein how to master using his soul weapon. Back inside the castle, Gejutel spills the beans on why the lord hates Rizel so much, revealing to everyone in the court that she is just a jealous little girl before accepting his fate with open arms. Again, not because he betrayed her, but because he failed in raising her into a noble worthy of the title lord. With that being said, he lowers his head and closes his eyes, ready for the lady to deliver the final strike. And that's when the man, the myth, the legend, the original Noblesse himself, enters the room. His epic entrance was not met with applause, but with fear. The young clan leaders tried to jump him, hoping they could at least slow down the man of the hour, too sweet to sour, but to no avail. Their attacks were simply lackluster and pushed aside. Thus, the big boss had to step down and face him herself. And although she didn't put off a good fight at first, seeing her people standing up to defend her against the grim odds lit a fire in her soul, and helped her to cast her ultimate move, Blood Coffin, to fight Rai's Blood Coffin move. The forces of the moves nullified each other, and the people behind the move fell due to the move's energy toll on the body. While the Lord had her numerous supporters to catch her, Rai was caught in last second by the ever-loyal Frankenstein. Admitting defeat, the Lord bowed her head, waiting for her fate after Rai whipped out Ragnarok. But instead of striking her down, the sword glowed and flew with the other sword revealing the old Lord's image. The image was his last thought that he managed to compress into the sword before passing away. In that image, the man dressed in a gown explains that he took his own life after a conversation with a smart-ass human whom we know. Of course, he didn't off himself because the convo was cringe, but because he realized that humans use their limited lifespan to improve themselves and become stronger as a species, while the nobles take their immortality for granted. Therefore, he concluded that in order to build a better future, he needed to step down, and since they could live practically forever, the old lord had to put himself to sleep. Naturally, after telling the clan leader who he trusted the most about the plan, they also stepped forward and joined him in eternal sleep. All except Gejutel, who the Lord asked to stay behind to ensure their future, and not let the new generation stray away from the noble's path. Hearing all this, baby girl gets overwhelmed and falls to Gejutel crying, realizing how much he cares for her and her success. Also, realizing that he offered his life after borderline insulting her just to have the other clan leaders unite under her. Therefore, she releases him, as well as Sarah, from their bond. And then her father's image apologizes for not telling her what he was thinking, adding that he loved her so much that he couldn't bring himself to tell her about the plan because seeing her cry would make him back out. After finishing the message, the two swords unite as one, signifying that the young lord is now on the right path. Fast forward a bit, and the gang is all healed up and ready to head home. Also, the lord seems much happier when talking to Rai now. Asking him what he thinks about her father, Raizel simply answers that he was a good father who was at times overbearing and annoying to deal with, making the chick laugh for the first time in her run on the screen. Low-key, it was such a nice, wholesome moment that showed the sibling dynamic Raizel had with the old lord. With that, the gang makes it safely back to Japan, ready to continue the normal mundane life they grew to love. The end.